warehouse was a death trap, flames climbing 30 feet high, and my sister Cordelia was somewhere inside screaming for help. But when I saw those Navy SEALs hesitate at the entrance, something inside me snapped. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. My name is Staff Sergeant Miranda Vaughn, Army Combat Engineer, and I've spent 3 years learning how to blow things up and tear them down. But nothing in my training prepared me for watching elite soldiers calculate odds, while my 22-year-old sister was dying 50 feet away. Cordelia wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be safe back home in Colorado, maybe teaching kindergarten or working at some nonprofit where the biggest danger was a paper cut. Instead, she'd volunteered with the International Relief Coalition and somehow ended up assigned to Forward Operating Base Sentinel, right in the middle of my second deployment to Afghanistan. She always said she wanted to help people the way I helped people, just with bandages instead of bullets. That morning, she was handing out medical supplies to local families when the insurgents hit us with everything they had. RPGs, small arms fire, the whole package. The old warehouse they were using as a distribution center went up like a matchbox. Was 200 yards away, coordinating an evacuation route, when I heard her voice crackling through my radio. Fear and determination mixed together in a way that made my blood freeze. She was trapped in the back storage room with 3 injured Afghan civilians, and she wasn't leaving them behind. That's when I saw the SEAL team setting up their perimeter. Heard their team leader talking about structural integrity and acceptable losses. These were the best soldiers in the world, trained for impossible missions. And they were standing there doing math while my sister coughed smoke and her voice got weaker with every transmission. I looked at that wall of flames and realized something that changed everything. Those SEALs were thinking like soldiers, calculating risks and probabilities, but I wasn't thinking like a soldier anymore. I was thinking like a big sister who'd already lost too much family to lose the only person left, who mattered. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because none of this makes sense without understanding who Cordelia was and why she meant everything to me. I'm third-generation Army. My grandfather fought in Vietnam, my dad served in Desert Storm, and I grew up knowing I'd wear the uniform someday. Military life was in my DNA, but Cordelia was different. She was 6 years younger than me, born when Dad was stationed at Fort Campbell, and from the moment she could walk, she was collecting injured birds and trying to nurse them back to health. When she turned 16, everything changed in a single phone call. Our parents were driving back from her school play when a drunk driver ran a red light and killed them both instantly. I was 22, stationed at Fort Bragg, when the chaplain knocked on my barracks door. I'll never forget the sound of Cordelia's voice when I called her that night. She wasn't crying anymore. She just sounded hollow, like someone had scooped out everything that made her Cordelia. I took emergency leave and came home to find her sitting in our childhood kitchen, staring at acceptance letters from colleges she'd never be able to afford. Child Services wanted to place her in foster care, but I wouldn't let that happen. She was the only family I had left, and I was hers. I applied for guardianship, moved back to Colorado, and watched her graduate valedictorian while I worked 3 jobs to pay for her college. For 4 years, I worried about normal things. Would she make friends? Was she eating enough? Did she remember to change the oil in her car? I never imagined I'd be worrying about her surviving a war zone. Cordelia graduated from University of Colorado with a degree in international relations and a head full of ideas about changing the world. She spoke 3 languages, had a 4.0 GPA, and could have done anything she wanted. So naturally, she chose the most dangerous thing possible. She applied to work with the International Relief Coalition, specifically requesting deployment to conflict zones. When she told me over Skype that she'd been assigned to Afghanistan, I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Here I was, finishing my second deployment at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, and my baby sister was coming to the same region to hand out medical supplies in active combat zones. The day she arrived at FOB Sentinel was the happiest and most terrifying day of my deployment. I watched her step off that transport helicopter with her oversized backpack and that same determined expression she'd worn since she was 6 years old. She hugged me right there on the landing pad, and I could smell her shampoo over the diesel, fuel, and dust. "I missed you, Mir," she said, using the nickname only she was allowed to use. "What are you doing here, Cordy?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Same thing you're doing, helping people. But we helped people in very different ways. I cleared IEDs and demolished enemy positions. She set up medical stations and taught local women basic health care. I carried a rifle and scanned rooftops for threats. She carried candy in her pockets and made friends with every kid in a 5-mile radius. Every morning for 3 weeks, I'd wake up with this knot in my stomach, wondering if today would be the day I'd lose the only person left who called me family. I'd watch her load up in those unarmored vehicles with her medical supplies and her translator, heading into villages where insurgents could be hiding behind any wall. She'd come back every evening with stories about the families she'd helped, the kids who were learning to read, the mothers who were finally getting prenatal care. Her eyes would light up when she talked about the difference she was making, and I'd remember why I loved her so much and why I was so terrified of losing her. That's who Cordelia was. Fearless in all the wrong ways, brilliant in all the right ways, and absolutely determined to save the world one person at a time. She believed the best. That morning started like any other. Cordelia was up before dawn, loading medical supplies into the back of a Humvee and chatting with her translator Jamil about the families they'd be visiting. I watched her from the motor pool where I was, prepping demo charges for a bridge inspection. She looked so small next to those massive vehicles, but she moved with complete confidence. "Stay on the main roads," I called out to her, the same thing I said every morning. "Always do," she called back, the same lie she told every morning. I knew she had her driver take shortcuts through villages where kids would run out to wave at her convoy. At 800 hours, she rolled out with her team toward the aid distribution center. It was an old warehouse about 2 miles from base, converted into a medical station where local families could get supplies and basic health care. The building wasn't ideal, built sometime in the 1970s with concrete walls and a metal roof, but it was the only structure large enough to handle the crowds. I was working a demolition site about a mile away when the first explosions hit. The sound of RPGs has a distinct whistle before impact, and I heard at least 4 of them in rapid succession. Then came the small arms fire, the sharp crack of AK-47s mixed with the deeper sound of PKM machine guns. My radio crackled to life immediately. Base command was coordinating response teams, calling in helicopter support, trying to get a clear picture of what was happening. But all I cared about was one frequency. "Cordelia, report your status," I said into my handset, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. "Cordelia, this is Miranda. What's your status?" Static. I was already running toward my vehicle when her voice finally came through, tight with stress but still controlled. "Miranda, we're under heavy fire at the distribution center. The building's been hit with RPGs. We've got wounded civilians inside and the main exit is blocked by debris." I could hear the gunfire through her transmission, the sound of rounds impacting concrete. "Cordy, get out of there now. Use the back exit." "That's negative. I've got at least 20 civilians in here, including kids. Some of them are injured and can't move on their own." My blood went cold. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. Cordelia's compassion was going to get her killed. "The insurgents are using the building as a target. You need to evacuate immediately." "I'm not leaving these people." That's when I heard something that made my stomach drop. In the background of her transmission, I could hear the crackle and roar of flames. The RPG strikes had started a fire. I was in my Humvee now, racing toward the distribution center with my heart pounding against my ribs. Through the windshield, I could see thick black smoke rising from the direction of the warehouse. The closer I got, the higher the flames climbed. When I arrived, I found chaos. A SEAL team had already established a perimeter around the building, and their team leader, Chief Petty Officer Donovan Thorne, was coordinating with base command. The entire front section of the warehouse was engulfed in flames, and I could see the metal roof beginning to sag from the heat. "Chief, where's my sister?" I demanded, running up to their position. Thorne looked grim. "Back storage room, east side of the building. She's got multiple civilians with her, including wounded. We've been trying to reach them, but the structure's compromised. That roof's going to come down any minute." I grabbed my radio. "Cordelia, what's your exact situation?" Her voice came back weaker this time. strained from smoke inhalation. Mir, I'm trapped in the back with 3 injured locals. A ceiling beam collapsed and blocked the doorway. There's fire everywhere and it's getting closer. Can you move the beam? Negative. It's too heavy, and one of the men has a compound fracture in his leg. I can't leave him. I stared at that burning building and felt something break inside my chest. Through the flames and smoke, I could barely make out the section where Cordelia was trapped. The fire was spreading fast, eating through everything combustible in its path. Chief Thorne was studying the building with tactical precision. Structural integrity is completely compromised. We estimate 60 seconds before total collapse. Ma'am, it's suicide to go in there. That's when it hit me. These SEALs were doing exactly what they were trained to do, making calculated decisions based on acceptable risk. But there was nothing acceptable about losing Cordelia. I looked Chief Thorne dead in the eyes and said something that probably should have gotten me court-martialed. With respect, Chief, that's my little sister in there. You can either help me or get out of my way, but I'm going in. Thorne stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. Sergeant, I understand what you're feeling, but this is not a survivable mission. The building's structural supports are failing. We're talking about a complete collapse in minutes, not hours. Then we don't have time to argue about it. I was already stripping off my heavy gear, pulling out everything except my sidearm and a small fire extinguisher from one of the vehicles. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was pure adrenaline mixed with something deeper, something that went back to that night when I promised a scared 16-year-old girl that I'd never let anything happen to her. Sergeant Vaughn, stop. Thorne's command voice cut through my movements. Look at me. I turned around, expecting him to physically restrain me or call for backup to stop me. Instead, he was studying the building with the same tactical precision I'd seen him use on demolition assessments. I've been watching you work explosives for the past month, he said. You know buildings, how they're constructed, how they fail. What do you see that I don't? That's when it clicked. He wasn't trying to stop me. He was asking for my professional assessment. I forced myself to slow down and really look at the structure, to see it through the eyes of a combat engineer instead of a terrified sister. The fire started in the front section where the RPGs hit, I said, pointing to the worst of the flames. But look at the support columns. They're concrete and steel, not wood. The metal roof is buckling, but the eastern wall where Cordelia is trapped hasn't been compromised by the initial explosions. Thorne nodded. Go on. There's a partial wall collapse that actually created a pocket of stability. See how the debris formed a triangle against the main support beam? That's protecting the back storage room from the worst of the heat and structural damage. I could feel my training taking over, pushing down the panic and replacing it with professional analysis. The roof will collapse, but it'll go in sections. The front will fail first, then work its way back. If someone could get in through the eastern approach and reach that storage room before the fire spreads to the support columns, there's maybe a 2-minute window. Maybe, Thorne repeated. That's a hell of a gamble, Sergeant. Chief, I've been gambling with my life for 3 years in this country, but I've never gambled with hers. I looked back at the building where smoke was pouring out of broken windows. I know Cordelia. She's not going to abandon those people, which means she's going to die in there unless someone gets her out. Thorne was quiet for a moment, and I could see him weighing options, calculating risks the way SEALs are trained to do. Then he surprised me. What do you need from us? Create a distraction at the front entrance. Draw any remaining insurgent fire away from the eastern approach. Give me 90 seconds to reach her and start the evacuation. 60 seconds, Thorne countered. After that, the structural failure becomes exponential. I grabbed my radio one more time. Cordelia, listen to me. I'm coming in through the east wall. Be ready to move fast when I get there. Her voice came back weak but determined. Miranda, don't do this. It's too dangerous. Cordy, do you remember what I told you the night Mom and Dad died? When you were so scared about what would happen to us? You said you'd never let anything happen to me. That's right. And I meant it. I clicked off the radio and looked at Thorne. Some promises are worth keeping, Chief. As I approached the flames, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. All those years of training, all those controlled demolitions, all those calculated risks. None of it mattered now. This wasn't about being a soldier. This was about being a sister who'd rather die trying than live knowing she didn't. The heat hit me like a physical wall the moment I stepped through the breach in the eastern wall. The air was so thick with smoke I couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. I kept low, following the sound of Cordelia's voice deeper into the building. "I'm here, Cordy. Keep talking. Storage room, straight back. Follow my voice." The floor was littered with debris from the ceiling collapse, chunks of concrete and twisted metal that I had to climb over. My fire extinguisher was almost useless against flames this size, but I used it to clear a path through the worst of it. The heat was so intense I could feel my uniform starting to singe. When I finally reached the storage room, what I saw made my heart stop. Cordelia was crouched over 3 Afghan civilians, using her own body to shield them from falling embers. One man had a compound fracture in his leg, bone visible through torn flesh. Another was unconscious, his face gray from smoke inhalation. An elderly woman was conscious but clearly in shock, her eyes wide with terror. Miranda. Cordelia's face was streaked with soot and tears. I tried to get them out, but when the ceiling came down, I couldn't move all of them by myself. I assessed the situation in seconds. The man with the broken leg couldn't walk. The unconscious man was dead weight. The elderly woman might be able to move with assistance, but she was disoriented and scared. "We're going to get them out," I told Cordelia, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "But we have to work fast." Using debris from the collapse, we created a makeshift stretcher for the unconscious man. I took one end, Cordelia took the other. The woman helped support the man with the broken leg, and we started moving toward the breach I'd created in the eastern wall. The building groaned around us like a living thing dying. I could hear the metal roof buckling overhead, rivets popping loose with sounds like gunshots. We were maybe 20 feet from the exit when the secondary explosion hit. I never found out what caused it. Maybe stored fuel, maybe ammunition the insurgents had left behind. All I knew was that the concussion knocked us all to the ground and sent another section of ceiling crashing down between us and the exit. "Go back! Go back!" I shouted, pulling the unconscious man away from the new debris. But when I looked behind us, I realized we were trapped. The collapse had created a wall of concrete and steel between us and the storage room. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the main support beam starting to fail. A deep, metallic groan that every demolition expert learns to recognize. We had maybe 30 seconds before the entire remaining structure came down. Cordelia was helping the injured man to his feet when she looked up at the sagging ceiling. I saw the exact moment she understood what was happening. Instead of panic, her face went completely calm. "Miranda, get them to the wall," she said quietly. "That corner looks the most stable." "What are you talking about? We're all getting out of here." "The beam is going to fall right across our path. Someone needs to stay here and brace it long enough for the others to get through." I stared at her in horror. "Absolutely not. I'm the smallest. I can fit under the beam and hold it up while you get them out." "Cordelia, no. That's suicide." She looked at me with the same determined expression she'd worn when she told me she was coming to Afghanistan. "Some things are worth the risk, big sister." Before I could stop her, she was moving toward the failing beam. And that's when I heard something that changed everything. The sound of controlled explosions coming from outside the building. Chief Thorne's voice crackled through my radio. "Sergeant Vaughn, we're breaching the west wall. 30 seconds. The SEAL team was using shaped charges to blow a new exit route through the exterior wall. I could hear the precise detonations getting closer, and suddenly there was light streaming through a hole in the concrete behind us. "This way. Everyone move." We carried and dragged all 3 civilians through the new breach just as the main support beam finally gave way. The entire back section of the warehouse collapsed in a thunderous crash of concrete and twisted metal, exactly where we'd been standing 10 seconds earlier. We stumbled out of that building looking like we'd been through hell, which I guess we had. All 3 Afghan civilians were alive. The man with the compound fracture was airlifted to the base hospital and made a full recovery. The unconscious man regained consciousness 20 minutes later and went home to his family the next day. The elderly woman, whose name was Amina, hugged Cordelia so tightly that neither of them wanted to let go. Chief Thorne approached us as the medics were checking us over for smoke inhalation and burns. His face was streaked with soot from the explosion. But he had that look that every soldier recognizes. Relief mixed with respect, mixed with something that might have been awe. In 15 years of special operations, I've never seen anything like that, he said, looking between Cordelia and me. You two just rewrote the book on courage under fire. But that wasn't the moment that changed everything for me. That came 3 hours later, when I found Cordelia sitting alone outside the medical tent, staring at her hands. They were bandaged from minor burns, and she was so quiet I thought she might be in shock. You okay, Cordy? She looked up at me, and her eyes were different somehow, older. I was so scared in there, Miranda, not for me, but for them, for you. I kept thinking about what would happen to those people if we didn't get them out. But we did get them out. Because you came for me. Because you trusted me to do my part instead of trying to carry me out like a child. That's when it hit me. For 6 years since our parents died, I'd been so focused on protecting Cordelia that I'd never really seen who she'd become. In that burning building, she hadn't needed me to save her. She'd needed me to trust that she was strong enough to save others. I realized something in there, she continued. All these years, you've been carrying this weight, feeling responsible for keeping me safe. But Miranda, you don't have to do that anymore. I'm not that scared 16-year-old girl anymore. She was right. Somewhere between college graduation and stepping off that helicopter in Afghanistan, my little sister had grown into someone I barely recognized. Someone brave enough to shield strangers with her own body. Someone willing to sacrifice herself so others could live. The official commendation ceremonies came later. Both of us received bronze stars for valor, and the story made its way up the chain of command all the way to the Pentagon. But what mattered more was the letter we received from Amina's family, written in careful English by her grandson. You saved our grandmother, but more than that, you showed us that Americans will risk their lives for Afghan people they do not know. This gives us hope for peace. That letter sits framed on my desk now, 5 years later. Cordelia finished her deployment and came home to Colorado, where she runs a non-profit that helps resettle Afghan refugees. She never talks about being a hero, but every family she helps knows the story. I stayed in the Army for 2 more years before transitioning out. These days I work as a safety consultant for construction companies, still using my knowledge of how buildings fail. But I learned something more important in that warehouse than anything they taught me in demolition school. Leadership isn't about protecting people from making their own choices. It's about trusting them to be brave in their own way. Cordelia didn't need me to save her that day. She needed me to believe she was capable of saving others. The Navy SEALs were speechless, not because we did something impossible, but because we did something they couldn't calculate. We chose love over logic, trust over control, and somehow that made all the difference. 3 Afghan civilians went home to their families that night because my sister refused to leave them behind. But more than that, I learned that the bravest thing you can do sometimes is trust someone else to be brave too. Cordelia taught me that courage isn't just about running into burning buildings. Sometimes it's about letting the people you love run into their own.